Turner and Townsend. If you are new to these sessions, then welcome. So it's Retrofit Information Support and Expertise, or RISE, and these are delivered by Turner and Townsend but funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. Today's session on advanced resident engagement is going to go into a lot more detail on resident engagement, and you can also view some of the more beginner level content on this on the website, so I'll put some links in the chat in the presentation. We do record the session, and we ask that you keep your cameras off and microphones on mute while Natalie presents, and then at the end there'll be time for a Q&A session, so you can come on and unmute yourself and introduce yourself if you want to, and we'll have a bit of a discussion. We will send a copy of the slides out after this. You'll get them hopefully in the next few working days, and we'll also put the recording on the website. So without further ado, thanks very much, Natalie. Looking forward to it, and I'll hand over to you.
Hey, thank you, Louise. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Louise said I'm a principal consultant here at Turner and Townsend, working on RISE for the last 2.5 years, actually. So my time at T&T has been with them. It's been really insightful. It's really good to get that overview of different organisations and how they're delivering retrofit, housing associations and local authorities alike. Lots of different techniques are required to deliver retrofit. As we know, we're a diverse population. We have different needs. Our housing stock is very different. And so retrofit is the perfect way for us to be able to understand how to communicate to those different households, because it's one of the more invasive types of works that we're doing, isn't it? We're going into people's homes and we need to understand what their concerns are, but we also get a chance to know what could suit them for their lifestyles. So I'm a big fan of covering off this topic, advanced resident engagement, because I come from a background of regeneration for council estates and housing association stock. And that, as many of you will probably know as well, goes over several years. So really, when we're talking about resident engagement today, we're talking about looking at it from a programmatic approach, that high level approach of change that you're trying to achieve for an estate or an area, and then down into the project level of that as well. So that case by case example of what's required. If there are any questions, please drop them in the chat as we go on today, and I'll make sure that we leave time at the end to discuss. So in today's session, we'll go over engaging the engagement strategy and plan, selecting the right channels for communication, so how to choose the right thing for your demographics and how to understand that. The monitoring and managing of engagement efforts. So once you have launched a strategy or a plan and you're delivering it, how are you going to feed back into that loop to improve it? And then I'll end with some case studies and a checklist, just to make sure that we have summarised everything that we covered today. Starting with your engagement strategy and plan, we call this the advanced session because it assumes that everyone here today is already up to speed with why resident engagement is so important. But I think it's also important when we're talking about building that strategy that you're going to need to define that back to your stakeholders or any senior level authority that will need to sign off on the strategy to allow for budget. So really why it's important to conduct resident engagement throughout the life cycle retrofit programme is because we're doing a very disruptive piece of work that also really requires residents to buy into using the new technologies in the home and to operate the house as it needs to achieve those performance outcomes from the new technology put in. Resident engagement also saves cost and time. So being able to reach residents effectively without wasting lots of money on different channels that don't work for them means that you're spending your money in the right places. You're also improving the satisfaction of your residents, which as a social landlord is key to you. It's reducing the amount of complaints through having a successful resident engagement strategy. And you're also being able to comply with PAS 2035 requirements, where resident engagement is a key part of meeting the compliance regulations there. Overall, resident engagement is, of course, a way to better plan the delivery of retrofit because you are reducing the risk of residents not understanding how to use their new systems and reducing the negative impact it has on your reputation. I think we face a lot of challenges through that customer journey of retrofit, and we'll look at a process flow in a minute about that. It's really about making sure that our engagement process isn't just something that we do at the very beginning of a project. It has a lead in time before the project is even approved often, and it should have a connection into your larger strategies. And all of that means that resident engagement is developing a larger focus we're seeing in retrofit programs, along with having a properly resourced team and a budget to go with it, because it's understood that that house is going to be managed for the lifetime of that house span and the lifespan of that tenancy. So it's important that it isn't just a one touch point for this one project. So as I said, we have the retrofit customer journey, and that isn't just from the beginning of the project. It should be something that can link in nicely to your whole engagement strategy that you have ongoing with your tenants around multiple other aspects. Perhaps you already get engaged with them about fuel poverty, for example. Now, if you look at this going from left to right, this is chronological. We're flowing from engagement planning through to post-works. And at each point, we've pulled out different actions that you'll be doing with your residents. So when we talk about the engagement planning, it's always good to think about have you linked the resident engagement into your retrofit project back to your organizational policies and strategies. The outcome of this stage is to completely understand that you have fully received support from your organization internally, and the benefits of engagement have been communicated well. When you're moving along to the awareness side, this is more externally facing. This is when your engagement planning is starting to look at developing that awareness with the residents. You're developing the awareness around what the scheme is, what the benefits will be to them, and how long the retrofit will take, and the potential disruptions to their homes. The outcome of this stage is you're looking to promote a positive culture within your organisation, but also with your residents, to make sure that staff and retrofit coordinators and contractors are aware of the upcoming projects that will be coming their way and the benefits and their other impacts. It's about having that aligned agreement on what the benefits are, why you're doing the project, and also the standards of communication you expect them to have and yourselves to have with residents. At this stage as well, you're ensuring that you've done some soft market testing with resident engagement groups or perhaps local organisations to understand what resident concerns might be toward the retrofit, and you're already starting to plan how to mitigate those in either the language you use in your engagement or perhaps the types of activities and events you are planning. If we move forward and we have a little look at the launch stage is where you are really going out and you're contacting all the residents affected by the retrofit project. Your retrofit coordinator as well is probably involved at this stage because you're starting to look at the designs that would be needed for the properties, starting to survey. And of course, that retrofit coordinator then becomes that point of contact for your resident, along with perhaps a resident liaison officer, another contractor liaison officer, and perhaps yourselves as well if you have an on-site presence. It's great if you can do this as a combined effort together to find that launch stage, working with your retrofit coordinator, so you can plan the engagement so there are no repeat visits. This is something we've seen a lot of, is there a way with your contractors to try and line up surveys, dwelling assessments in a way that limits the amount of household visits to that client, to the resident? It's also a way to understand from a technical perspective, like the retrofit coordinator, and from the resident liaison, let's say, a common language around what the benefits of the project are, and make sure that they're all aligned on how they're going to communicate that. The outcome of this sort of session of this section of the journey around launch is really about being able to ensure that the best contact methods are used to convince residents and to fully engage with them around the retrofit works. So in your stages engagement planning up to launch, we would be advising that you're looking at doing some surveying yourself to deeper understand the demographics in your communities, understand their concerns around retrofit, but also start to understand and survey to find out what their preferences are for being engaged. This might be stuff that you already know. It could be connected to a larger program of engagement works that you already offer, but it's important that this is also applied to a retrofit project. That way you're taking those learnings that you already know about your particular tenants and being able to build it into your style and your engagement strategy. During the design stage and installation stage, you're keeping up to date with residents, and you're making sure at this point that you have processes in place, very clear processes in place for managing complaints, for delivering updates, and communicating about the measures being installed and the pace at which this is happening. You're also providing advice to residents about the retrofit measures that are due to be installed or are being sized up, and where possible, understanding what their concerns about being able to use these in future, so you can already start informing that handover stage about the documentation you might need to create there. Similarly, through installation, this is where it's at its most intrusive for the residents. It's perhaps where it might feel it's most hands-off if you're part of the project team internally and not the contractor delivering works on site. And again, it's making sure that at this stage, advice is being given out to residents at a regular basis about the expectations of timelines, of the measures being inputted, and also ensuring that we're working with them as much as is possible to work around schedules that might be that might come upon them because they have dependents, health issues, or perhaps are celebrating religious festivals. Some of the best examples I've seen of being able to get access and having a very collaborative approach with residents has been where there's been programmed in respectful time for Eid and understanding when works would be better off not done in the house so that space can be left for prayer mats to be put down and the festival to be observed, the time to be observed. Going towards the end of this life cycle, at least for the project here, you have that handover stage as well. At this point, we're asking, have residents received tailored energy advice and guidance about their installed measures? And that's probably going to be better done in a face-to-face method. So when we think of handover, we're really talking about a longer period of time, not just the handover from practical completion. You're considering, have you got processes set up for checking back on a resident after the first heating period and the first use of that system? Are you checking in with residents when tenancy hands over? And what are the different materials in terms of having physical manuals, online available manuals, or perhaps doing one-to-ones to demonstrate the products? And I'd merge postworks and handover into each other and just add an extra activity that you'll be doing in that postworks phase. Your postworks phase is really you asking, how effective has our engagement been? And you'll set KPIs for that at the very beginning of the engagement plan, which might be the effectiveness of how these systems are adopted and used properly. It might also be a reduction in complaints of the property. But ultimately, you're looking for indication of what you have done is something that you can replicate and adapt across the whole project. Okay. Engagement strategy is slightly different to an engagement plan. At this point, we're looking at, when you're developing an engagement strategy, you're thinking about the connection to the organizational strategic goals, as I said, and the key messaging. The key thing to get out of your strategy, and we don't see this enough, I think, is getting those performance metrics and understanding the benefits that you want to achieve through doing engagement. And when we look at the plan is more of a specific, so an engagement plan is specific to the project. It's going to be more tailored with short-term desired outcomes or benefits to the organization. And your performance metric and feedback loops are going to be closer tied to the measures that you're installing specifically to that site. I wanted to cover just these two very briefly because when we look at that large-scale customer journey, your engagement strategy should fit overarching all of this at a program level. Your engagement plan is more bespoke and make sure it discusses more of what will be involved, who will be involved, and how do we know it's working at that project level. The engagement plan, the key sections will have detailed plans and timeframes and costs for engagement activities. Providing enough budget to do events is always key, and understanding that a letter drop can always be more expensive than you realise. Projects and resident-specific messaging on benefits is another one that's going to be key to set out in your plan. Who do we have on the estate? What are the preferred channels to be able to communicate with them? What barriers do we see to communicating with them? All of that needs to be addressed in a project plan. And when we look down a few of these other bullet points, the other contents might include a specific stakeholder engagement plan. At a program level, you might have key organizations that you as an organization prefer to collaborate with. Those, for example, could be Age UK, general practitioners and hospitals, pharmacies, citizens advice bureaus, and schools. this is your local knowledge on the ground, and they're going to be really key to map out specifically for that site that you're working with retrofit, as well as having a stance on that from a strategic perspective of who you prefer to engage with. I say that because building these longer term relationships with organizations who exist in across your communities where you have stock is going to be great for sourcing additional information about how effective your engagement has been, but also how the retrofit works have benefited the community, so that you can feed that into your process of the retrofit program across all your stock. So when you're thinking about building your strategy and your plans, there are a lot of sources of data. We want to go for a data-driven approach as much as possible, and then test that against local knowledge. So common places to find data to put into your engagement plan can be open databases, where you will be sourcing the basic information of the building properties, such as the fuel poverty indexes or EPC data, for example. You can also source information from internal departments at your organization, and bringing in work from perhaps the private sector housing team to understand what development might be going on in the local area that might be upsetting residents, or talking with the climate team to understand the other benefits, the cross benefits of delivering retrofit that extend outside of carbon savings, and working with the asset management team who have the longer term vision about what's going to be delivered across all the estates. These are all great departments to bring in to build that engagement strategy, but also to cross-reference to build up the key benefits, identify those benefits for the project that you're delivering. There's also paid for data you can access, as you can access more specific data around stock condition surveys, of course, through surveyors, which will then go into informing the types of measures and therefore the way you're going to communicate to your residents about the measures and how they should use them. However, what I'd say is the focus today is really about getting to know your residents a bit more. That's why it's advanced resident engagement strategy. So by that, I mean using census data such as age, household composition, disability, ethnicity, and income to start to build segments or profiles about your residents, so that you can start to understand how you can approach the different channels, different timings, lead-in times, and also what adaptations you might need to make when doing the works on site. Building profiles is a really great way to start off a strategy. It doesn't need to be as basic as distributed by age. You do find that there's obviously complexities in all of us, some who are early adopters of tech, some who are less so. Your profiles might be geared around that instead. How receptive do we think the household might be to adopting new technologies? And you can break down your profile by that, rather than just assuming that a certain age will experience retrofit in the same way as someone their own age as well. I talked about local knowledge. This is qualitative data that you can build into your engagement plan and strategy. Myself, I've previously worked with a lot of family clinics or family centres when we're looking at regeneration, and that's a route into the community to understand what the real issues are below the data. So we might be seeing that there is a large household composition of single mothers, and you would be wrong to make an assumption that all of them have the same disposable income or job requirements or lifestyles within their homes. Working with the family centres gives us more of an insight into what the real issues might be, or the real opportunities as well. It's a great way to find community champions as well for change. It's how we've identified in the past community champions who would be able to go around and work with older residents, for example, who might not be sure about how to use technologies post retrofit works. Having someone on site who is a known, familiar, friendly neighbour who would be able to check in on their neighbours who might not be able to handle the systems is only something we find out by being on the ground or by working with these local partners. You've gone through your strategy, you've built your plan, we've just talked a bit about that, and you've got the life cycle of the journey. I just wanted to talk a bit about developing capacity in delivering the strategy, and that is internal and externally facing. Examples of this might be considering within your plans, having training for resident liaison staff or maintenance staff who will be inheriting the building, and letting them all come together to look at the specific plans for the project, understand the timelines for delivery and the potential risks to those timelines for delivery is a really good way of giving them a heads up on how they can start communicating and planning their communication to the residents. I've seen this best done with slide decks or a briefing on the project before it's launched. So resident engagement teams coming together with the project delivery team and being briefed on a whole day so that they could actually develop their own customer journey profile for the resident engagement team and therefore start building their key messages in advance of the work starting on site. Building infrastructure to deliver your engagement strategy also involves contacting key stakeholders, understanding through a mapping exercise, for example, who's in the local communities who will be able to support you through different channels, either being a route for complaints or issues to be raised through them into you, or for you to be able to have an ear to the ground to understand issues and complaints on site. Your infrastructure is also going to be technical infrastructure, so having an area on a website is also a great way of giving a face to the project, if that's possible with yourselves. If it's not, the other way we've often seen this is having a staff section, which will list out, especially resident liaison or key members of staff who are, as part of their job, able to accept emails or calls from clients who are having retrofit works done to their homes. We might also think about developing these kind of softer processes around having mutual referrals. We're aware of another local authority who is currently working with their contractor to send through referrals for other households that are not currently eligible for the current schemes of funding that are available from the government, but might be relevant for other future funding. And that's been a great way to make sure that we don't lose potential households off the list. Now, selecting the right channels is something I alluded to, and this is really about you being able to identify in your neighbourhoods, what are the resident concerns going to be, what are their preferences for communication, and what's going to be most effective for you getting your message across and when. I think with channels of communication, you need to act on resident feedback. We keep talking about getting data in about this. You'll know from previous communication cycles, rent collection, general updates about the business, about tenancy matters, how people react to different messages. Getting feedback about how they would like to be contacted and kept up to date about their retrofit program is going to be key in being able to understand how to shape your strategy. A list of project stakeholders and identifying each group's desired communication method is something that we actually detail out in our resident stakeholder toolkit. Sorry, our resident engagement toolkit, and I'll send that around afterwards, actually, if you remind me, because for me, that's one of the best tools that we offer. It's a summary of who you should be looking to contact and how you can identify the group's desired communication methods. I mean, at the end of this, really, you're ensuring that all the information materials are resident friendly, they're audience friendly, aren't they? And so when we look at the different options that we have here, when we talk about multi-communication platforms, these flow both ways. It's for the resident to contact us, it's for us to contact the resident. Now, out of all of these, you might not have every single channel at your disposal for a retrofit program, but it is important to just question, why are we using this method? How effective is it? And setting a standard for, or setting a process for when we use certain methods. I think email and postal is a very good one to set some KPIs around, key performance indicators, as well as processes around. So when you're developing your engagement strategy, setting a turnaround time for responding to resident queries is going to be really key. This is how you can measure the effectiveness of that channel. So what are your turnaround rates for responding to emails that are received? What matters are discussed over email versus which matters should be discussed in person, perhaps more sensitive matters, but then legal matters will need to be audited via email. And then also considering the accessibility of those channels to your different demographics. So is there a language barrier here that we need to consider? Would email actually be better because we can it gives a chance for the text to be translated online through an online translator? Or is face-to-face going to be much better for building that relationship, perhaps with someone who's more distrusting? So multi-communication platforms, the takeaway from this is to consider which ones you have at your disposal, which ones need to be established, what processes and KPIs do you need to set in place for using each of these channels? And then understanding the propriety of each of these based on the demographics or those customer segments we discussed just earlier. The building safety campaign, some of you might be aware of, it's about ensuring that people are heard as part of any retrofit project, or any project in particular, actually, any building project, and understanding who lives in each project, in each home, and that's how we have to change our language, isn't it? It's that home, and engaging via multiple channels is important. You need to demonstrate that we're providing listening opportunities and communicating with people and being as inclusive as possible. I'm sure no one here is guilty of this, but mass mail outs of letters are effective for that first wave of just being able to notify people, but a letter sent is not a letter opened, and therefore these points on here are very much about going past that to understand who you're contacting so that you can actually measure the effectiveness of that communication going through. It's an opportunity to improve your project and build that relationship with your residents so that you can avoid problems in the future. And so as I was saying, very much at that engagement planning stage, it's also important to be setting those key performance indicators. How do we know what's going right? When we establish a strategy, especially around engagement, we're looking for what we would call benefits realization as well. So what are the benefits that we think we're going to achieve through spending time and money and resources, human resources, on engaging the public? I've put a few examples here. So you might experience that you might already be anticipating that you're going to measure bill savings and comfort levels. I mean, these are great ones to establish early on in the process of retrofit. We want key messages that say, let us in, we're going to do this great work for your home. It's going to make you tons more comfortable, and it might even save you money. And I think bill savings is a tricky one right now. It really is. It's very hard to demonstrate that in all the measures that we're doing. And so comfort levels is that other one that we start talking about, and you need a baseline for a comfort level. So when you're setting your KPIs at your engagement stage, engagement planning stage, it does rely on you developing a baseline. And forgive me, I haven't put that in the slides, but really it is about understanding what is your baseline position, what are the benefits you want to realize, and what is your future state that you want to achieve with this. Comfort levels is a good one because that is one that you can already start as you do a soft launch and engagement around retrofit, understanding how people use their spaces through a resident survey or through open forums. I'd actually suggest open forums are probably better for establishing that first contact, meaning having resident steering groups, attending tenant association meetings, or any other forums you've established with your communities. It's a great way just to get them to report about what's important to them in terms of the comfort of their building. And that helps you start to establish at least characteristics of what comfort is defined by them and your residents, and then going out to survey that baseline when you start doing the initial assessments for the dwellings before doing retrofit interventions. Other metrics you might see, because they are indicators of successful engagement, might be around the number of sign-ups. So here, sign-ups means signing up and agreeing to have retrofit works done. Now, this might be more relevant when we're talking about non-social owned stock, so stock that's private, perhaps your leaseholders, for example. You also might want to be capturing, how did you hear about us? And that question often indicates that your partnerships at a local level are working, or how they are working. Another one just to pick up on here is number of complaints. I'll go into that in a minute. Of course, the other benefit that we're trying to realize through engagement is that we aren't generating more discomfort, more issues, more of a burden on our residents, and generating complaints to ourselves as landlords. That's a slip I've noticed, that I keep saying ourselves. It's because I used to work at a housing association for a while, and I still feel that way. So if we have a look at complaints, I've jumped myself. If we look at complaints in a minute, what we'll go over is why they are important to capture during the process. But of course, a benefit of the whole engagement is to reduce those complaints. Some of the more tangible benefits to measure through engagement is going to be how the building itself is used. You'll see various statistics around how effective measures are in their predicted performance outcome versus what they actually achieve. And I've seen at a worst case that being 10 times ineffective than it was when it was first put in, into that being 10 times more effective. That scale really does fluctuate. And really, in a project nowadays, it's becoming more and more common practice to put in monitoring equipment before the retrofit work starts, so we can develop a baseline of minimum 6 months, ideally, of data about consumption usage for that specific household. And therefore, we can get a more accurate read of what the reduction in electricity and energy uses, carbon reduction use, and therefore get a proper profile for the individual house and how it's used by its tenant. You might want to consider what equipment is installed, and of course you'll need permissions to install this. So in your engagement planning, you're considering that lead-in time to have conversations with residents and making sure that it is budgeted for, as well as planned specifically with a monitoring consultant, or if you're doing that in-house or with a contractor, that they have a program that aligns also with your retrofit program too. All this information that we're advising you collects are around the KPIs that will indicate your engagement strategy, the success of your engagement strategy. All of this can be collated into a customer database. Many organizations already have this, but we appreciate not everyone does. But retrofit is a great excuse for being able to establish that. And again, it might be one of the benefits that you'll see coming out of an engagement strategy, is creating a database where you are able to monitor the reduction of customer complaints, reducing the failure of meeting demands from the customer, prioritizing and resourcing where your attention is paid towards different assets that might be not performing as intended through the system change. And it also can support you in the automation of reporting for noticing repairs, but also pulling out households who have had past issues that have gone either unresolved or have been resolved but keep coming up frequently. Generally, the CRM, your customer relations data management system, is nothing innovative, I'm sure, for a lot of housing associations. But retrofit, again, is just a really great chance for us to be able to build up not only our asset data, but also an understanding of our customers and how they use their homes, and also how they are treated through that process to maintain a longer term positive relationship with them. So that if you need to go back in a year's time to treat the property and its new technology, or to conduct further monitoring, you already have an idea of those different touch points they've had because they're recorded on the database. And this is just a slide summarizing those items that you would record on the database. I don't think we need to go into too much detail, but I think one of the key things is about actions needed. So understanding in your engagement strategy and your engagement plan for any project, it's building in processes of how actions are going to be followed up, monitored, and addressed across teams. Because of course, in a retrofit, there are many touch points from the contractor through to the resident liaison officer, yourselves. At the same time, there's business as usual services contacting the resident, such as rent, energy monitoring services, energy advice services, and possibly even other retrofit teams and coordinators who are coming in and out of their lives. So having a CRM is just a way to combine that all together so we can keep an eye on what is being told and where and by who. One of the important things about this whole process is changing the process of retrofit and the works being done to the house from done to done with the resident. It's, after all, very hard to separate yourself from the home. If you're a resident, it is your home. It's an emotional space as well. And people coming into your life to do this work, yes, it should be short and sweet, and we don't want to elongate or prolong the engagement past what it needs to be about the retrofit matters specifically. But it is a significant piece of work that's being done. So we don't want to blow it up, but we do want to be able to make sure that there are forums for individuals to understand the process, and that needs to be something that is agreed in line with what works for those residents. For example, holding resident forums at 12 p.m. on a workday might not work for everyone. is there another way to spread that, to survey for the community when a better time would be, or to have 2 types of surgeries available, or a drop-in house like a surgery where different residents can come at a time that suits them, but that also works for your resident liaisons or other contractor staff on site. Giving residents a chance to co-produce the retrofit works for their property is just another way of building that buy-in. There are small changes we can always offer in any delivery program of works to homes. That can be from the colour of countertops when we're doing kitchens and bathroom fittings, floor fittings as well. But it can also be around timings. So understanding how people's work-life balances or their rhythms in the house is another kindness we can give to get buy-in through the process. Understanding those households is also far more rewarding than having to bulldoze your way in and get the works done. One of the best case examples I've heard recently was an organisation who had gone for local labour. They had made it a priority within hiring their contractor that the on-site staff were also local to the area, local being within the combined authority region. And what this did is it actually ended up with a demographic representation of different ethnicities who actually had shared languages with the residents. And in this case, it made the building of trust between the two, the contractor and the resident, far more beneficial. So that's a case where we think about co-producing has actually been enabled through understanding the contractor who would be best suited for the site. A little bit more on providing feedback opportunities post-retrofit. As I said, you want to mark the effectiveness of your engagement, so perhaps monitoring the access rates to households to understand that you were able to get through there versus the refusal rate for accessing properties, but also understanding the levels of satisfaction. Measuring satisfaction throughout the process with residents is a key way to be able to iteratively adapt your project. And it's good to do this whilst in delivery, as you'll be able to have a way of preventing any of the risks that refusals could lead to the programme. I've seen this done where the order of fitting loft insulation versus doing the internal wall insulation was switched around, as it was seen by residents that it was actually more beneficial for them to have their lofts done first so that they could clear out everything from the hallways, put that all in the attic and be able to get the IWI done afterwards. There have been others who have been able to talk about a lack of dissatisfaction with the contractor, and charters have been put in. Oh, sorry, I should explain that. A lack of satisfaction with the contractor because the contractor was causing mess in the apartments when they were going in to do the works. What that enabled the project team to do was to develop a charter with the residents about behaviours and conditions that they would like to see from the contractor. The contractor developed that in kind with the residents and was happy to adopt those practices, improving the levels of satisfaction on site. Customer complaints policy, you'll all have one, I'm sure, in post. And really from here, the key thing to pick out from here is about staff training on when to invite a customer to complain and through which channels. Having a key single point of contact for a resident throughout the process of retrofit and extending into the years they are a tenant is going to be important for making sure that complaints don't fall through the cracks, and there's ultimately someone responsible for following up on this. Your customer complaints policy would be included in an engagement strategy, and you're covering off in this the escalation process through your different governance ranks internally, but also with your external partners who are delivering works. A resolutions process, which carefully also includes any of the external parties who will be required for that, such as the contractor, and with steps for what to do if a customer expresses dissatisfaction. This is an example breakdown, another framework of looking at this, of listen, inform, respond, learn. Ultimately, when we're talking about developing that complaints policy, in your engagement strategy, it's about how can we avoid this and how can we learn from it. So having the guidance for all of those who would be operating with your residents and talking to them. I'd say another example that I've seen that's been quite strong on this is creating an operations manual, which has dissected what the listen, inform, respond and learn cycle is for each of their staff working on the project. So they all have a clear map of who to go to, what key messaging to use, and how to de-escalate situations with residents. Avoiding complaints in the first place is obviously best done through thorough planning, but we absolutely cannot avoid it at all. And so no matter how much you plan, complaints are likely in installation projects. And it's how we handle them that is key. How can we build back that relationship with the customer and make sure that they are using the house as intended? So I just wanted to bring on to the last part, which is around testimonials and case studies. What we have here is Salix Homes. In 2019, following a review of their resident engagement structure, they created a new customer committee to put customers at the heart of how they operated as a social landlord. And the committee is made up of 12 members, so it's relatively small, but they're all there with purpose. And they know through a terms of reference, which is, here's what you're expected to do, here's the purpose of the committee, here's the expected behaviours of the committee member. They all come together with the local community to hold the Salix Homes to account on a customer standard. And that's been developed just so customers know what they can expect and what they can challenge. Now, the committee are paid the same amount as our board members, the Salix Homes board members, and given parity in terms of governance structures. I think that's a really interesting thing there, is about if you're trying to get people to come together, to give over their extra time to ultimately, yes, benefit their community, but really benefit your business services. You need to think about, what is your incentive? What are they getting back here? How will they be treated? And how is this just not tokenistic? So doing things like establishing them with the same governance structures that mirror the organisation and incentivizing either through paid time or another benefit, you're able to establish some serious buy-in from a committee who will ultimately help you in shaping your customer service. The key to the success of the project was quoted as being the creation of this new customer charter, and it's called Our Promise to You. And you can see that that language in itself is about building that relationship of trust between the landlord and the community, and it's very directed here. It's to the individual. It sets out a comprehensive set of new promises for customers. Your voice will be valued, you will be treated with respect, you will be given clear and accessible information. The quality and safety of your home are at the heart of how Salix Homes build. There's a promise that their service will provide housing services that are efficient, consistent, and easy to access, and that they'll work in partnership with the community and you. That's the language that keeps being used. You as the resident can independently monitor us and hold us to account. And I think it's that accountability piece which is really key here. It's knowing that they can wave this document at you and say, look, you said you'd do this. That's where strategy is really key. They consulted over 7,000 customers to get this feedback, and they got feedback from 300. So you have quite a high conversion rate there, I think, for any kind of mail out in terms of getting participation from residents. It's really one of those things that getting feedback on a charter is a way to already establish buy-in, because it's a way for residents to feel that they are shaping what you say you're going to do. However, the biggest part is about demonstrating that you are doing what you're doing. And I'd say the next piece of this activity definitely should be a monitoring on how those promises are being achieved and lived. It's similar to any sort of reporting that we do with sustainability as well. We set ourselves these targets, we set out how we're going to measure them, and then we have to do that follow-up work every year of reporting back how we've actually achieved them, to show that we are truthful and committed to those promises. I'll just do a last case study here, actually, and this is around Hammersmith and Fulham. London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham worked with Disabled People's Housing Strategy Implementation Group. And they published a disabled people's housing strategy around their homes, about creating in co-production with local disabled residents. The resident-led group is now co-producing the implementation of the strategy to make their housing better. And I think this is really key, because too often there are a lot of accessibility groups who we can work with. There is a lot of policy around planning for new builds around what is accessible. But really, when we're doing something like retrofit, it's so much more nuanced, because we have an individual house that may have in construction requirements and adaptations that will need to be made during the time of the works, that you really do need to go to the household to understand what the individual needs. And that's why we've included this case study here. Basically, this ensures that disabled residents have their support and their support network have a recognised formalised voice here that will feed back in to how the houses are treated and improved. And the ethos of the group is nothing about disabled people without disabled people. And I think that goes for any minority group or any group who is underrepresented in decision making. And often in built environment, we are building in our minds for a very standardized lifestyle. We see that through having nationally described space standards, through having standardized processes and floor plans, which of course make building efficient, but they then need to be tailored down for the individual, because ultimately those are the ones who need to be able to use it and to use it correctly. Thing with your engagement plans that's useful to do to reflect and collate your own testimonials. It's great when we hear stories from the housing associations who we work with who discuss the good news stories. So we have a resident liaison officer who had a close and trusted relationship with residents and was able to provide a holistic service, answering questions about well-being, timelines, and technical aspects of the build. It's really good to hear these stories, but it's even better if we get the residents telling those stories and seeing them on your own websites, circulating them through newsletters in the community, or even just feeding them back to your team so everyone knows that this is effective and it's working. Equally, we want to know when it's not working, but it is great to highlight those success stories as well, because it's a way that we can start sharing what does work and what doesn't work. And ultimately, we're going to be doing this for a long time right now, going into homes and retrofitting them. We need to understand that it is actually being that our engagement strategies are effective for getting our foot not just in the door, but really making sure that people understand what's being done to their homes and are realizing the benefits. And by realize, I mean feeling those benefits, not just understanding them. I'm going to just move over to the checklist at the end. This is just a summary point that I'll leave on. Our resident engagement toolkit is fantastic for this. Each section breaks down that customer journey and what to expect from engagement planning through to post works. There's also tips in there for how to approach and work with other local stakeholders and considerations around the most effective communications channels. It includes checklists. We do love a checklists. And so some of the examples here for your takeaway is understanding that you have your multi-communication platforms established for contacting residents around retrofit and receiving information from them, that your marketing covers all demographics. You've understood who your community is, what best suits them for communication. You've also informed that through data-driven resident engagement strategy that considers items such as fuel poverty and statistics. You have a customer complaints policy, which has escalation and resolution steps so that everyone is on board throughout the organisation who are working with that project around what the routes are towards resolving complaints. And perhaps that's even shared with residents as part of your engagement strategy so that there is transparency over the process and faith can be built in that process. Ideally, throughout your retrofit programme, you're developing case studies, I'd say good and bad. Those good ones are the ones that you're going to need to hold on to so that you can demonstrate what has worked and what hasn't worked. You have a testimonial process in place as well. That's the back end of that case study that's getting thoughts directly from your residents, quotes from them that can be used for future communications about using certain, let's say, a new heating system, or perhaps the benefits or the ease of using solar PV and having that on the house. You've also started to do frontline training. This was going back to training the staff so that they understand what the different touch points of staff, so that they're all aligned on key messages, key program dates and milestones, and key risks to the project, so they can understand themselves how to plan their own communications and works. And again, we've said it throughout quite a few times, communication is two ways, and having that two-way referral with the local services is a way to make sure that your people aren't, or households aren't dropping through the loops of your communication strategy. Working with GPs, local energy advice bureaus, a great way to get more insights in the community and to capture those who might be seemingly harder to contact from your position, less engaged, but really are easily contacted through better channels. The last one on there is, do you have a contact or referral for key information? I'd say this point is really all about making sure that whoever you are reading this checklist, you have that center point of communication between the resident and your internal organization, who will ultimately have responsibility for them over the life cycle of their tenancy. That's a really important key, because we do the works, we often leave, and then the monitoring needs to be followed up. Or there's fallout from the customer's perspective that doesn't fall into the contractor's responsibilities, but falls into the housing association or landlord's responsibilities. So it's really key that that one person who will be responsible for them ultimately past the works is identified and is briefed on everything that's going to be happening. Okay, thank you all for spending your lunchtime here just to walk through this, which is a subject I'm really, really interested in. And I think it's one that's really key to unlocking the scale of retrofit we want to achieve, but also getting that buy-in so that we all feel responsible for being able to make a shift with climate change. So I'll open the floor just to questions.